All right. It is 6 o'clock, though, so I want to get started. I know we still have a few people rolling in. They always roll in a few minutes late. That's why we start on time. Encourage them to get here on time. All right. Well, let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Father God, Lord, we thank you for this wonderful chance to meet here together, Lord, and just in Jacob. I got sick last week, so we didn't have it. And I was being selfish. I just didn't feel like sharing with you guys, so. But, yeah, so uh, if you think back about where we were, Jacob is in his, remember Jacob? He was born grabbing the hill, and that brings back images of the snake from Genesis chapter 3, the heel grabber, the tripper, the trickster. So he's kind of like the snake character, even though he's the one, the blessing of God is going to come through. And so that's one of those things that you wrestle with. How do we deal with when the blessing that God has promised? He keeps his promises even when we don't. And so there's a wrestling with that in these passages. And of course, that's going to lead us towards that wrestling match that we will get to in a few weeks. But the scheming of Jacob and his mom kind of led him into a mess, remember? And he had to go into exile. He went to the east, had a vision at Bethel where he saw a step-like pyramid or a Jacob's ladder, you call it all kinds of things. The image we're probably supposed to bring in mind is kind of like the ziggurat kind of imagery, bringing us back to that Tower of Babel kind of imagery, where, but God this time is coming down to earth. God is bringing it down. And so we have this imagery, and then he goes in exile. He goes to his uncle Laban's house, and he meets Rachel, who he falls madly in love with her, just absolutely in love. And he wants to marry her and says, I'll work for 7 years. And, of course, he's tricked. Her name means lamb, if you remember. And the sister's name is Leah, and her name means calf. That's right. And so you have like this calf and lamb, these kind of stuff going on here. But we have these rivalries, and they're tricking each other. And Jacob has tricked Laban out of the best of his flock. And with we talked about last time the sex sticks yeah, go back and listen to that one. But yeah, so we're kind of taking a turn now, as we're going to see on this chart here. Yeah, that we just left the middle of this chart. This is like a macro chart here. Let me bring up my pointer. There it is. All right, so we're looking back here, and we saw this going on. This Yaakov's sons, you remember the baby wars? And then he has this flocks where he steals he tricks his uncle. And now we're going to be kind of moving into the last section here of this middle section here before we get to the end of Jacob's story. But we're kind of taking a turn here. We're going to see him begin to make his way back out of exile. And so the 20 years is almost to an end. He was in exile for 20 years. So we're going to see a pivotal part And, Jacob's going to say, I'm tired of all this. Let me out of here. Let's go home. And so we're going to have the chase scenes and all that's going on. They're going to make their way back to the middle, and they're going to, so that's where we're at. So what I want to do, following the same pattern that we've been following, I'm going to read through, let's go through verses 16, 1 through 16, and then we'll go back and read and talk about it. And we'll just make our way back through it. But let's read it all at one time just to get a feel for it. Now Jacob heard what Laban's sons were saying. Jacob has taken all that was our father's and built his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob saw from Laban's face that his attitude towards him was not the same as before. The Lord said to him, "Go back to the land of your ancestors and to your family, and I will be with you." Jacob and Rachel and Leah called to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, "I can see from your father's face that his attitude towards me is not the same as before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that with all my strength I have served your father, and that he has cheated me and changed my wage 10 times. But God has not let him harm me. If I said those spotted sheep will be your wage, then all the sheep were born spotted. If he said the streaked sheep will be your wage, then all the sheep were born streaked. God has taken away your father's herd and given them to me. When the flocks were breeding, I saw in a dream that the streaks, spotted and speckled males were mating with the females. In that dream, the angel of God said to me, 'Jacob.' And I said, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Look up and see all the males that are mating with the flocks are spotted, streaked, spotted, and speckled. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you poured oil on the stone markers and made a solemn vow to me. Get up, leave this land, and return to your native land.' Then Rachel said to Leah, 'Answer him. Do we have any portion of our inheritance in our father's family? Are we not regarded by him as outsiders? For he has sold us and has certainly spent our purchase price. In fact, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So do whatever God has said to you.'" That's interesting. All right, let's go back through this. I got some things I want to point out. All right, Wendy will ask me tomorrow. So, got to make sure I'm doing my duty. She couldn't be here today, so. All right. So, Yaaqov, remember that's the Hebrew word for Jacob. Yaaqov, he heard the word of Laban's sons. Now remember, Laban's sons were only mentioned one other time. When Jacob said, "Hey, give me these particular areas," then Laban said, "Hey, that's a great idea." And then he rigs it and takes some of them and gives them to his son so that Jacob can't have them. So Jacob tried to trick, Laban tried to trick Jacob out of these flocks by giving them to his son. And that's the only other time Laban's sons are mentioned. But against all odds, he's the trickster, he's clever, he finds a way even to produce abundance, even when he's deceived. So Laban's son hear about all this abundance he's produced, and they do what I hear quite often when we start talking about inheritance. The children start saying, "Yeah, oh, he's taking all. We're not going to have any money." I don't know how many times I've heard that when someone, especially in older congregations, where the children start saying, "You're not allowed to spend our money." We would prefer you die quickly. They don't say it in those words, but they often mean it. Uh, you're not allowed to you're not allowed to do this, you can't do that, because they want their money. Um, but, they see this trickster who's part of the family, but he's not their son, and say, hey, we see he's taking all that belongs to our dad. We're not going to have any wealth left. And it also says that, Lavan's seeing that his flocks are dwindling. So Laban's face, he saw that from Laban's face, his attitude towards him is not the same as before. He doesn't hold him in regard. This is going to be a whole motif in the narrative that follows, seeing people's faces. He sees Lavan's face. It's not like it used to be. He's going to wrestle with Elohim and say, I've seen him face to face. This is going to be a whole theme in some of the stories to come, the seeing people's face. So we're starting to, they're beginning a motif that we're going to see going forward. So, yeah, of course, he always meets Esau, too. Sees him face to face as well. I think that, going back to that, I think it's easier to deceive someone if you don't look them in the eye. And he begins to see their face here. Everyone sees wrong. Jacob is wrong to all these people, including God. And he's going to start seeing them face to face. He sees Lavan's face. He sees God's face. He sees Esau's face. This is going to be a motif that he's going to have to start seeing as he's going to begin to becoming a changed person. And that's, hopefully I'm not giving away the ending. You guys have read this. I'm going to assume you've read this. If you haven't, we've been working through Jacob for a while now. So he sees Lavan in his face and can see, he doesn't like me anymore. So God, Yahweh, says to Yaaqov, it's time to go back. Return to the land of your fathers, to your birth family. Remember what was said at Bethel. I will be with you. And so he sends for his wives, and they're out in the flocks and field, and kind of makes it sound like it's a clandestine meeting. Come see me out in the fields. We want to have a private meeting. We don't want your dad hearing about this quite yet. It says to the ladies, I've seen from your father's face. It's not like his attitude towards me. It's not like it used to be. Of course, the narrator has told us that already. But here's the thing. The God of my father, now look at that. The God of my father has been with me. He still hasn't claimed Yahweh. He's still not claiming Yahweh as his God. Yahweh is speaking to him, and he's still the God of my father. The God of my father. He's been referring to him as God of my father this whole time. God of my father. God of my father. I used to give, when I taught at the college, I used to give some of my students a hard time because I would ask them, like, what religion are you? And they would say things like, well, I'm a Christian. Well, why? Well, because my parents go to church. And so I would bring up Jacob, the God of my father. That doesn't mean he's your God. But the God of my father. So now he says, now I've served your father with all my strength. Has he? I mean, Think back about the stories we've been reading. I just want to put this in your head. Has he? Well, but he's been tricking his father-in-law too. He says, your father has cheated me. He's changed my wage 10 times. This is the first time we're hearing about this. Huh. But God did not allow him to do any raw. Remember that word? Raw. That bad, evil towards me. If your dad says speckled, that will be your wage. But it's crazy. The flocks would bring forth speckled animals. Now, we talked last time we met about how Jacob was using the sticks to cause the animals that he wanted to not mate to mate with the stick instead and using the other ones because they would. You just missed a good one. All about sex sticks and flocks from the just. It was a good anthropology what they did there. There is an article that you can go download that I put a link to in the last time's notes, and you can read all about it. You could, you could. Of course, you could go listen to it. I'm pretty sure I sent it to you in an email. But yeah, so he says, so this isn't like he's been like, oh, God is just crazy. This is what happened. Well, not really. If Lavan said your striped one will be your wage, well then God just made it striped. That was your wage. I mean, do you trust this guy? God works in mysterious ways. Wait, he's been orchestrating this whole time. And what he says is, your father has been cheating me all along, but God has been with me. And when Lavan says, okay, you can have your speckled ones as your wage, it's remarkable. They were speckled. God delivered it to me. So we have the ability to evaluate the truthfulness of what he has been saying here. Because we have had the stories before. So as we're listening to him make this explanation, is what he's saying true? No. Do we trust this guy? Do we trust his interpretation? Who is he trying to persuade here, anyways? His wives. He's saying that God granted him this blessing where actually he worked really hard for it. He schemed. And of course that makes me wonder, were his wages really changed 10 times? I mean, this is the first we're hearing about it. I'm just saying, it could have. But it makes me wonder. Because I don't know. You're right. It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't tell us that. So it could. It's very possible. It's very possible that he changed the wages. But I don't know. This whole thing is like we're seeing him say stuff. God has just blessed me. When we've had a whole passage right before this about how he schemed and tricked and. Definitely justifying it, that's for sure. Where are we at? Verse 10. So when the flocks were breeding, I saw in a dream, you know how those animals were magically produced. one day when the flocks were mating, I lifted up my eyes and I had a dream. And look, the male goats were upon the flock. Well, just happened to be the striped and the speckled and the mottled ones. And Laban conceived, these are the ones that, and the angel of God told me in the dreams, Yaaqov, and he said, here am I. And he said, lift your eyes and see all the male goats and the striped and the speckled and the everything. I am the God of Bethel. Go, okay, get up and go from this land. The narrator told us that part. All this stuff before it, that's all new information. The narrator told us where he said, get up and go. And then, but he's got this whole section here about how God told him that he was going to bless him with these animals, these portions, and of course that convinces his wives. And then Rachel and Leah, do we have any portion of our inheritance? Aren't we going to actually consider foreigners to him now? I mean, he sold us. I mean, that's flat out, she says, he has sold us. And that's what he did. He sold them for 14 years of work. Consumed all our silvers. So I guess all the wealth God has delivered from our fathers now belongs. Actually, they say belongs to us. To our sons. This is a pretty remarkable story. Yeah. Well, he worked 14 years for them, yes. And then he worked another 6 years for the flock. Yeah, the dowry rules. Dowry rules change from culture to culture and time period to time period. It would have been very likely they would have had some kind of dowry rule. That's why he was okay with working for him for 7 years in the first place. Well, it kind of sounds, well, that's what they're saying here. Has he? I don't know. It sounds like they think he's already spent all that money. Well, he probably did. That was very common in those. But he was willing to sell his 2 daughters. Why should we not believe that? Absolutely. So as we look at this story, there's really 2 different ways we can read this story. One, we could believe everything that Jacob says. And say, well, this is how, like, okay, the narrator gives us a little glimpse, and then he's expanding on it. And a lot of people interpret it that way. What about just like the dream at the end there? I had this dream, the speck ones, but none of that was in the passage before that, where he actually talks about the putting out the rods and the. Well, yeah, he did it all. Then he has a dream. Yeah, I mean, the narrator kind of takes a back seat here. Jacob is the big talker in this whole section. The narrator told us that God said it was time to go home. And then Jacob reports that an oracle has come with this big, long, dramatic dream and about the goats and the multiplying and all that stuff. And And so he's like, clearly God has been delivering me all this to me. And none of that's in the narrator's account. So we can really, we can read this in two different ways, can't we? You can either say that the narrator just left it out and then Jacob is filling in the details and it's all true. Or you can say that the narrator told us what happened and Jacob is, well, scheming again. Father's God, that's right. And that's the way I read it. But if you go read a commentary right now, I can point you to 10 commentaries that just, this is what happened. That'll be an interesting story when we get to it, won't it? Uh, Joseph is an interesting story. He did convince his wife to go with him. So was all this story just an elaboration to convince his wife to go? Jacob never mentions Yahweh, and Yahweh the narrator never attribute Yahweh's abundance, Yaakov's abundance to Yahweh. The narrator, up until this point, has pointed all the abundance to the scheming of Yaakov. But Yaakov, in this speech, wants to attribute his schemes to Yahweh, to God. Maybe because it suits his purpose. To persuade his wives to, hey, let's get out of Dodge. In certain ways, absolutely. Of course, as I think about this, I think how many times do we say things like it's God's will or it's God's fault or it's God's provided or God gave me a vision or a dream or something like that when it was really our schemes and our plans and our desires. God is definitely putting up with Jacob, but in not too long, God's going to show up and pick a fight and hurt Jacob pretty bad. But that's not But at that point in the story, you're like, this guy kind of deserves it. But in the prophets and like Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Micah, there are whole sections devoted to stories or poems about trying to discern which prophets really speak for Yahweh and who's really telling the truth. Ezekiel will be one of those prophets say, I had a dream, a vision, and Yahweh said to me, and but the Hebrew Bible is really interesting. It tries to give us categories, wisdom how to discern when people are really representing God's purpose and God's voice. And I really think what we're seeing here is and I know like there are going to be people who disagree with me on this, but I really think what we're seeing here is God has said one thing, and Jacob in his scheming is trying to attribute it to God. And he's saying he had a vision, he had a prophet. Trying to see. So the Bible is using this to really tell us how to see a false prophet. Because it was not from God, it was all from his scheming that all this came about. And this is one of the things I think this is really trying to make us wrestle with as we wrestle with the story. If we do more than just read over it, it's my day to read it, so I read through it. Because let's be honest, when we're reading the Bible, we have those days. We read the devotion, or we're reading through it a year, and we have to. Yeah, I gotta keep that streak alive. That's right. Uh, uh, well, and I think that goes back to that test the spirits thing, because like Jacob here is saying, like, God told me this, but it's out of his own scheming. He's trying to attribute his scheming to God. And that doesn't match up with God's character. Of course, it makes me go back to that idea. How many times do our plans and our schemings, and we say, well, it was God's plan, or it was God, we try to attribute, well, it was God that did, and it was really our scheming. But I like what Tim Mackey said. I was listening to him at one point. He said this story, he was talking about this particular story, is about a man who cannot tell the difference between his own self-preserving schemes and God's blessing, or between his own will and God's will. With they panic, maybe, absolutely. It's all God doing it. Um, but interesting enough is he was told by God it's time to leave. Why does he need this whole story? Because he doesn't trust. I think that's definitely something. He doesn't trust. But people who deceive regularly don't trust, because you can't trust them. Well, eventually. um, but this man, he can't tell the difference between his own will and God's will. But in the bad sense, it's not like, there could be a good sense of that where you're like so in tune with God that your will and God's will are matching up. His will is, and we see places like that in like Ezekiel when he prays for God's Spirit to put His people to Torah. We see like it's God's will that is working its way through this man, and they're so in line. But this is more like where I mistake my own schemes for God's will. Yeah, the whole lives they living with him for 20 years on top of it. Yeah, very possible. Well, okay, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. Don't do this. But how many of you can think back at times when you've embellished the story? Yeah, not like out lied, but you might have embellished the story to defend your case a little bit more, make it a little more sure. I don't want people to raise your hand. Don't. Um, and I like how this passage, this scripture here, there is two different ways we can read it, and I really think they do that kind of stuff on purpose. Um, it's it makes us wrestle with it, um, and and decide who gets to tell the truth about what God said. We'll think back about Genesis chapter 3, right? Uh, God says something, you know, don't eat from the tree that is in the middle, the tree of knowing good, Tov and Ra. And then the serpent comes along, and it was then uh, uh, Eve comes along and says, "Oh, we can't even touch it." And the snake jumps on that. Well, if you touch it, you're not going to die. Um, I think one of the things that I like about this is it's a way we can wrestle with, are we supposed to believe Jacob or not? Can we believe him? Can we not? We're supposed to wrestle with it. I think that's why you can read it two different ways, because it's forcing us to work through this. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, we all have different biblical traditions we come from. You know, not to mention denominations we come from, but also biblical tradition. How did your parents or your not or the church you grew up in or the engage with the scriptures, and what do they believe about certain things, and can you, some biblical traditions don't even believe the Bible is capable of such subtlety, um, but if you're raised to see all these stories as children's literature, moralistic tales, um, yeah, it's easy to walk away and say, like, um, God told Jacob to leave, and so he did. And he had this dream, and that's the week's lesson, and we're done. Um, but if you have a sustained reading where Jacob's story is working on this, and then you're reading this, and you're saying, is this a scheming or is this not a scheming? It's and I think sometimes we have to work at it, because a lot of times, if you grew up in like Sunday school, and that was where you got a lot of your biblical tradition, BBS, I'm not saying these are wrong. BBS is great. Sunday school is fantastic. But if that's where you quit learning about the Bible, then you don't pick up on the subtleties and the wrestling with it, and it's all children's tales anyways, you know. Um, and I know when I first started my journey in Christ, I was going to a church that very much the tales, Genesis was just a bunch of children's tales anyways. We all believe in Genesis, but we tell them like we would to your kids. Um, we all believe, but there was no wrestling with it. There was no like, did Jacob lie here? Was he embellishing? There was none of that kind of discussion. No, it was in there. It was true, and that leads to all kinds of different problems for me. Like, Jacob is not a good guy up until this point. Yeah, but we're not there yet. We haven't gotten to where he becomes Israel yet. Um, up until this point, he's not a good guy. So if you just read it like face value, he said it, it's good, then you're really getting this like God who schemes and supports your lying, And you're getting this, and you're like, is this one the God I want to serve, or why should I not scheme and behave like this? I mean, I know at one point in my life I was a very good liar, and I thought, why not? Jacob lies all the time. And it comes from that reading that it was just, like I said, in the Bible is true. And then as I began to study more and grow more, and I began to ask these questions like, is this moral? Is what's happening in these passages? You have to stop and wrestle with it. And that is so hard for us to do because we don't take the time to do it. I gotta hit my streak. Oh no, New Testament's full of this kind of stuff too. Oh, New Testament's full of stuff we have to wrestle with, and passages where they say something and it reminds us because they've been reading the Old Testament, and and it comes from all this stuff too. We have to wrestle with these passages. It's not just, the Old New Testament is different. The Hebrew allows for some different things than the Greek and Aramaic, and um, but it's very much, it's throughout the whole Bible. The Bible is meditative literature. What that means is we're supposed to wrestle with it. We're supposed to think on it. We're supposed to focus. We're supposed to ask ourselves, what's going on here? What's the author's intention? How is this supposed to be read? And some of us are really good about doing that, and some of us are not. And that's why we have those questions like, wait, I don't understand this section. And it's okay to say, I don't understand this. And we start looking it up, like how do we deal with this issue, and do that research. Because it's not something, the Bible is, as one of my professors called it, shallow enough that everyone can wade right through, deep enough that everyone will drown. Everyone will drown. But yeah. You're right. There's some things um, but in this narrative, Yaakov, let's go back to this narrative. We're going to run out of time here. Yaakov may believe that Yaakov, he actually may believe what he's saying. It kind of reads to me like he actually believes that all his schemings are how God is blessing him. But why should he not? That's exactly what his mom did. Like, oh, she was told your son Jacob's going to be over the first, and she schemes to make sure it happens. She said she's going to take the blame. This is, this. He can't see it. I don't think he can see the difference between his twisting of God's reputation and his own agenda. I don't think he can see it. That's true. But what we see in the Bible is often more the result of what we've been trained to see or not see. And that's part of the challenge of this. Uh, anyways. I don't have time to go into that next section. All right, we got about 15 minutes. I do not have time to go into the next section. Laban pursues Jacob. The chasing is upon us. Interesting passage, but we're going to have to stop there. Do we have any comments, questions, concerns, anything else? No, he's not. The both of them. No, he's not. Never. Well, see, but you would never. You don't know that. If you just think Jacob's the hero, and Laban's the bad guy, then we don't see how Jacob is also scheming. You got two snakes wrestling here. I feel bad for Rachel and Leah for a lot of this. They get kind of thrown in there, but then at times they behave. Well, with the whole baby wars, they're behaving badly. I mean, we are part of the traditions we grow up in. It does make me wonder how in the future, what will we look back and say, really, we did that as a society, you know? Um, but I once had a dream. I once had a dream. I once had a dream. Yeah. And you know that when you say that once, it kind of reminds me of Once Upon a Time. And I know some people just said, you know, like it's a word and it's perfectly good word. This one time I had a dream, and it could have been something he's really remembering and has not really reported there. That is one way to interpret it. But as I read through it and think about the scheming, it kind of sounds more to me like Once Upon a Time. You know that one time, I was reading this article. Yeah. Um, I don't know. Like I said, I'll probably get some nasty emails because I want to watch this online. And I disagree with you, and that's okay. It does. It happens. No, we stopped at 16. We haven't got to the running away yet. We will get there next week. I was going to get there today, but we only got. I do not. I'm not getting. I'm not going to touch that with 10 minutes left to go. You can read it tonight. Next week we will talk about those household gods. Um, so next week I'm not going to touch that for 10 minutes left to go. Uh, we just don't have time for that. But it's a very good question. Thank you, Rudy. Hang on to that for next time, because that's an interesting subject as well. So hang on to that. So, all right. Anything else? All right. Would someone like to pray us out?